It is Monday, January 25th. It is now 9:30 officially. On that clock is wrong. And this is the Public Safety Committee. I'm Councilman Smith, Chairman of the committee. I'm joined by Councilman Reyes and Councilman Zine. Without objection, members, I will consent. Ladies and gentlemen, could we have quiet, please? Doug, take your conversation outside. Mr. Garcetti, zip it.
We'll sit down here and zip it.
Thank you. Without objection, we'll take 6 through 9 and number 11 as consent. I was going to take number 5 as consent, but Dr. Williams would like to speak on it. Dr. Williams, we'll go ahead and take that up in just a moment. And then... I
got a question on 6.
All right, we'll call 6.
Seven.
You have questions on 7?
8.
Okay, there's no consent calendar.
Simple question.
6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8. That leaves 9 and 11.
I'm there for you, man.
You're good.
Okay.
He's got my back. And if there's no objection, we will note in file number 10. Okay. That being the case, let's take item number 5.
Morning, John White, City Clerk. Item number 5, CAO report relative to designated CAO as the city's authorized agent to execute all applications for federal and state financial assistance for all claims and grants related to recent local and national disasters.
Good morning. That's what we always do. That's the way we've been doing it, correct?
This is the way we've been doing it since 1994.
Okay. Dr. Williams, just hang on.
There is one issue, though, I'd like to raise.
Your name, Bill?
Since Bill Koenig, CAO's office.
Folks, can we have quiet in here, please? Thank you.
Since the time our report was submitted to the committee, we've had another emergency event, namely the storms of January. We would like to add that to this list for authorization.
Okay.
It would be the January 210 winter storms would be the designation.
All right. That'll be amended then. Dr. Williams?
Who pays? Eventually, that will be the question. One of the things that we're interested in is that the City of Los Angeles and supposedly the County of Los Angeles both have the most stringent fire requirements for brushlands in the entire United States. If you watched many of the videos of the fire, they were bombing houses. They were defending the fence lines of houses. This is not in accordance with the 100-foot and the 200-foot requirements that the LA City Fire Department have right now in place in CDs 2, 5, 14, all sorts of places. So why do we have fires? What we're dealing with is CAO is going to look at getting the money for the end result, not at the beginning. Prevention is always better than trying to repair, especially for now. And yes, we have the floods. Why the floods? Because we have the high rainfall, but also because fires went down to the very fence lines of many of the houses in the city of Los Angeles. Why? Because they weren't cleared. The City of Los Angeles Fire Department does not enforce its ordinances, which would protect the people in the brushland fires. Well, now we don't have to worry about some areas for maybe 5 years until the brush grows back, because all the fires have destroyed right up to the 100-foot or less than 100-foot from the houses. So we have other places, especially in the Mulholland Hills and other places, Mount Washington, all sorts of places where the current laws are not enforced by the Los Angeles Fire Department. And yes, we are soliciting interest on the part of the fire commissioners. Thank you.
Just for the public record, Dr. Williams, the LA City Fire Department clears 700,000 parcels every year. So they are doing that. What you don't see is our brush clearance program is brush, not trees. And we have a lot of vegetative problems in the city of LA, and there is a motion we'll be dealing with that will define vegetative.
We know that.
Okay, thank you very much. That being the end, are there any questions? We will amend it as recommended by the CAO, and that will go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item number 6.
Item 6, Board of Police Commissioners and CO reports relative to the 2009-10 Next Generation Click It or Ticket Program Grant Award in the amount of $67,000 for the period October 1st, 2009 through September 8th, 2010.
Morning.
Matt Crawford, Office of the CAO. As stated, the report in front of you is the 2009-10 Click It or Ticket Program grant. This award will allow us to spend $67,000 in sworn overtime over the next year, primarily during 2 higher periods of enforcement and awareness. The department's here to speak more.
Good morning. Commander Mike Williams, representing the department.
Mr. Zine?
Question, Mr.
Commander,
Knight?
who's going to be doing the enforcement? I know it's the police department. Is there any special sections? Is it going to go to patrol, traffic? Where's it going, the money?
What we do, council member, is we look at the productivity of all the officers in the 4 traffic divisions, and we draw those individuals in and use those people.
So it's going to traffic divisions?
Yes.
CINTE?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not going to include patrol?
No, does not include patrol.
Okay, that's all I need. Thank you.
And you can't get any of that overtime because you don't do that anymore.
Thank you very much. Neither can you.
I never did. All right, that's all, no questions?
That's all I had.
We'll go forward with approval of the committee. Thank you very much. Item number 7.
Item 7, Board of Police Commissioners and CO reports relative to a donation with an estimated value of $17,320 from Los Angeles Police Foundation of food and lodging for 26 individuals assigned to the Police Department's Special Investigation Section of Robbery Homicide Division during advanced training tactics at Camp Pendleton.
That summarized my report right there.
It just seems that for 26 individuals, is this post-reimbursed?
I don't know if it's post-reimbursed. The foundation reimbursed the individuals directly.
I understand, but $17,000 for 26 folks, if they're going to get post-reimbursed, if they're staying at Camp Pendleton, are they at local hotels? And I'm just trying to take the spread of 26 and $17,000 for 26, and if there's no cost for the program, what are we spending $17,000 on? Detective, Lieutenant, sir. Or are you a captain yet?
Captain McClure from Robbery Homicide.
Excuse me, Captain. You've risen quickly.
Thank you. That training is a week-long training put on down at Camp Pendleton. It is not post-reimbursable, but it is all post-approved lesson plans for the training, and it deals with the specialized training requirements of SIS. They stay in local hotels while they're down there that meet the requirements of the amount that can be used for lodging. Everything meets the requirements as far as that goes, but there are 26 members that attend that training on a week-long basis.
Is it, so you say it's post-certified but not post-reimbursed?
It is not post-reimbursed, but it is post-approved. All the training is inputted into TMS, and post-credit is given to everybody who attends that training.
Is there a cost for the program? Does the city have to pay for the folks to go through that program?
No, that is the entire cost and was funded by the Police Foundation.
So the 17 is for lodging and food, any incidentals, or that's it?
That's lodging and food pays for just about everything. It's
For 1 week down there?
correct.
Okay. Fine, thank you. That's all I need.
Reyes? No questions? Go forward with approval of the committee. Thank you very much. Item number 8.
Item 8, Board of Police Commissioners and CO reports relative to a donation of a Ford F-150 truck from the Lewis Management Group for use by the Police Department Central Area Vending Enforcement Detail.
That's your
Again.
report. Mr. Zine?
All right, now, $49,666.
Yes.
This Lewis Management Group is being very generous with this 2009 vehicle for that amount of money. Now, how do we express our appreciation to this Lewis Management Group for this wonderful donation?
Specifically, I don't know how.
Well, I'd like to know how we show appreciation for someone who spent almost $50,000. Have we sent them flowers, seeds, candy, helicopter ride? We should do something.
Peter DiCarlo, LA Police Department. The Board of Police Commissioners sends a letter out to all the donors that provide donations to the department and thanks them for their generosity.
So that's done by the police commission?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you like to put your dress on and go get a
No,
little
I
bit?
just want to make sure that anyone's going to give us almost $50,000, they should be thanked for that type of generous donation. That's all I need.
No other questions?
That's it.
That goes for the approval of the committee. Thank you very much. Now, we'll go back to 1 through 4, and we'll call those together.
Items 1 through 4, various motions and reports regarding DNA evidence kits. Motion is Garcetti Caretz instructing LAPD to report relative to reconciling DNA database inventory. Motion Garcetti Smith relative to use of police department salary account funds in the amount of $377,190 to continue outsourcing of DNA analysis. And also motion Garcetti Caretz Smith Parks instructing LAPD to report with an update on the effort to reduce the backlog of DNA evidence kits.
We can have the, we don't have the CAO report first.
Good.
I notice we got all the PD staff here first. I was actually going to ask for the CAO first, then Controller Gruhl and Council President Garcetti, and then we'll have the LAPD staff. Thank you.
It's item 3, right?
Yeah. 1 through 4.
All together.
Pick one.
Our report is on item 3 specifically. The motion in question recommended the transfer of $377,000 from the police department civilian salary account to the contractual services account. This money would be from the original $966,000 that was put in the adopted budget, the 0910 adopted budget, for the 26 additional staff for Scientific Investigation Division DNA analysis, the DNA serology unit. At this point, well, at the point the motion was written, the Managed Hiring Committee had not yet approved the 26 positions, and therefore, due to the LAPD's lengthy hiring process, including a full background investigation, and just the city's general hiring process, it's essentially impossible, even as we sit here in January, to actually get anybody on board, certainly not criminalists, before probably about May. Our estimate is probably 4 months, and that's a pretty aggressive estimate. Since then, the Managed Hiring Committee, which met on Friday, has approved unfreeze of all 26 of the positions, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still going to take a significant amount of time for LAPD to hire them. Our recommendation at this point is that we transfer all the funds that we estimate the PD will not be able to spend on salaries to contractual services for outsourcing so that effort can continue. It's our understanding that the department is, if not completely, almost completely spent their $3 million in outsourcing they were given for the current year. I should also say, where we have a recommendation with a specific dollar amount, we're still hammering out the exact dollar amount, and we'd like to be able to work with the department through today. I know this item is scheduled in Budget and Finance for tonight, and we'll be able to come back with a number that we can all agree on in Budget and Finance tonight.
One question, are there existing lists for these positions?
I'm not sure about the criminalists. For some of the others, there are definitely existing lists.
So why 4 months then if you have an existing list? Usually it's...
Councilman, there is an existing list.
June, name, please.
I'm sorry, June Gibson, CLA. There's approximately 90 candidates on the list, so that should be more than adequate to meet the department's needs. In addition, the exam is given on a continuous basis, so that means we're replenishing a list on an ongoing basis.
Okay, so why a
But
4 month delay?
the selection process and the background investigation will still take a pretty significant amount of time.
All right. All right, let's hear from Controller Gruhl and Council President Garcetti. Morning.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.
Welcome.
And to be here with my president there. Colleagues, I just want to talk about a couple things. One is the audit that was the basis, I think, for many of the motions that were introduced today, other than item 3, which relate to specifically a follow-up audit that was done this last year, and we released it November 5th. And just to highlight some of the key findings that we found. One is, and I know the department will respond to this, that the backlog numbers were inconsistent, and really to have a number that we were confident with. And I think the department acknowledged that as well. So we kind of went back and forth on a variety of numbers. And so they, I know, have gone back and looked at their physical inventory and eliminated the kits which had already been tested and those that are untested. It's a critical part to know exactly where those kits are. If you've ever seen the actual freezer and to see how many kits were in there during that time, it really is devastating. I think relating to the other item, the motion introduced by Mr. Garcetti, we had outlined in our audit that the outsourcing of testing had really reduced the backlog. But what we found was a brand-new backlog within the department. The numbers I heard today were close to 1,700 kits that had been outsourced that need to be retested by the Los Angeles Police Department to be able to be uploaded to CODIS. And that the FBI policy and all of us, again, I know another item on your agenda today, which is we are encouraging the FBI to change that policy. But the average of, what we found, an average of 72 days. If you outsourced a kit, when it came back to the LAPD, it took them 72 days to retest that kit and to be able to upload into CODIS. And to us, that was unacceptable, and the fact that now we have untested kits, backlog kits, those that are coming in, and now an internal backlog, which really was unacceptable. The other items that we listed were related to notifying victims, that there be a real protocol. They have been working very closely. The great thing is that Chief Beck was, of course, responsible for this in the last year and is very familiar with all this. Been working with many of the groups represented here today about the most appropriate way to notify those victims without putting them at risk, to be able to close the chapter in some instances for them. And so they're continuing to make a better protocol for that. The also is that they lack a comprehensive and modern database designed to really track those untested rape kits. Something we've talked to the foundation about. Others, really a computer system that will not have to be counted each time. And you know better than I the various places where DNA is tested, and there's not a comprehensive database. Also, I think what you've committed to, I know, Mr. Chair, is for increased transparency and accountability. They should prepare written reports and be before you so that there's this constant knowledge base going forward and accountability. And lastly, as one of the audit's finding was coordinating with the Sheriff's Department, the importance of having a standardized procedure. We've spoken to Zev and the sheriffs about having something so that when you know in this region how many kits have been tested, not tested, what the protocols are, that there's common language and common interest in notifying victims as well. And just lastly, which I know Mr. Garcetti is going to speak out as well, is I had a little deja vu as we were laughing about, you may recall a few years ago when the Department of Transportation and CAO decided not to hire people to do the left-hand turn signals. And we found it out 9 months into the year. And we said, who makes policy? Not them. Those of you in this room and on the City Council. And last year, the policy was that we would hire 26 by January 1st. And it was 6 months. We gave them 6 months funding because the whole idea was it will take you 6 months. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, for us to find out a few weeks ago that, in fact, none of that had happened and they had not been approved by the managed hiring process. And so that we literally lost 6 months. And your question, Mr. Smith, was right on, which was, if we have a list, why is it going to take an additional 4 months? It should have already been moved ahead. And although I support using some of this money for contracting out, we cannot, if we wait to hire people, we will continue to have this backlog. We will continue to have the internal backlog. And so I know when you make that decision, you will be looking at ensuring that those women who have been waiting for those tests, those kits to be tested, that we will be able to give them that kind of peace that it's been done and not have a secondary backlog in the LAPD. So I think the message must have gotten to them, Mr. Garcetti, because on Friday night when they approved it, I think the motions and everything we said, you know, we are not accepting that you're not going to hire those people this year. So I would ask that you move forward on their ability to be able to hire and to look at some creative ways. I think Ms. Butcher, you'll hear from today, suggested to have that backlog internally be dealt with. But it is an important issue, and it's a reason why a follow-up audit, you know, oftentimes people say, why do you do a second audit? This is why, because it really did identify that secondary backlog and some of the other challenges that we need to meet. And the department has been great in trying to reduce that backlog. Mr. Garcetti has played a leadership role in the city council as well. And just want to acknowledge my two auditors who are here, who work very hard in the background, who worked with the department to make this a audit that has some real teeth in it and some, I think, real direction on how we can improve this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee and Madam Controller. Good to have you back in the chambers, so to speak, here. I'll try not to repeat anything, just in the interest of time, but it is a little bit of like Groundhog Day, and I think this is important for the council to recognize when we make policy. If we change policy, we change it. It doesn't get changed in a committee where we don't know about that and we find out about that later. As you know, I've been a strong advocate of eliminating this backlog. The good news on the 7,500, I think Mr. Zine was there when we had the crime press conference on crime being down, but those 7,500 are down to 1,200, which is an accomplishment all of us can be proud of. As the controller mentioned, though, there is the potential of a new backlog, an already growing one, of the ones that come in if we don't get this capacity in place. I don't favor as a principle outsourcing where we can save money in-house, but because we're behind, I think we owe the survivors, especially where there's statutes of limitations that are going to expire, to be able to get a couple months that we are behind that stuff out the door immediately, because some of these are literally ticking in terms of the time on them. So that's why the motion put that in. In the meantime, I would urge you not to reverse as we are policymakers, we do get many bites at the apple, as many as we want. But having made that decision on those 26, saying that public safety is at the very top of a very difficult pyramid this year, where we're going to be making cuts throughout, but that public safety thing has been at the top. What is more important than actually somebody who's suffered, as I think Chief Beck put it, the worst crime you can survive, and to make sure that they have some sort of justice. Moving forward, I would urge you to have the department hire the maximum and continue to push them. You know, without us saying a number, it would be great if it were the 26, but the maximum we can get this year, and then we'll be looking at that moving forward. I understand that the police department has not overspent its civilian account. We know on the sworn side we all have a real problem to deal with because of growing deficit from this year, but that would be very important. And so I propose this plan to take a portion of the hiring funds for these 2 months to extend them to the contracts with private labs. I agree with Ms. Butcher, and I think what she's going to say, which is if we can give more shifts in-house, and if we can do things, you know, this is one of those areas where we are furloughing people because we have to do it evenly across the board, but this is maybe one place where it's a priority, and we can be giving people the sort of shifts to make sure that we get rid of this backlog and do not grow another one. So if we work smartly, aggressively, we can do this. I urge your support today and give justice to the thousands of victims who are still out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate very much, first of all, Ms. Garcetti, your motions and bringing it to our attention. Secondly, that having Ms. Gruel in the controller's job, because she sat on the budget committee for so many years, understands how we had those discussions, and we said this 26 people were the most important thing we're probably going to do in this year's budget. So I appreciate that insight. And before we get to the other question, just one thing, Mr. Garcetti, as we go back in March with the League of Cities to Washington, D.C., maybe you and I should walk the halls and try and find sponsorship on a bill that will overturn the FBI's policy.
Absolutely. That'd be great.
And see if we can, and if we can get from the police department any other cities that are fighting hard to change this, so we know what states to go look for Congress members, senators from other states to join in. That makes it a very palatable bill. So,
and there is some legislation that's pending in Congress. Actually, Human Rights Watch has worked on with cities around the country that face this on both kind of guaranteed on the victim side with some funding to make sure these backlogs around the country are cleared, but also to change those rules. So we should.
And and I'm going to be back at that same time, and so we look forward to. We've talked about just going and meeting with the Justice Department because FBI can make this change tomorrow, and whether. So if we can convince them that it is important, both Chief Bratton and Chief Beck have sent letters indicating that this policy should change. There's a lot of other police departments that similarly suggest that, because we certify all the time outside contractors for different things, and it does not, again, diminish our ability that we think to hire within, but we think that policy should change because there's a lot of other cities across the country that will never have that kind of people. But I agree with Eric that the more we can hire now is going to save us in the future and be able to do that. So I look forward to working with you all.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
Ms. Reyes?
Yeah, in terms of the finding ourselves at this stage, and to read the letter, I want to ask both of you, what was the reaction when you inquired about the city's managed hired committee and their lack of performance and/or what was the rationale? Was there any given to the council president or city controller?
No, there's no heads up. I mean, I think we know we're in a bad budget situation, so I don't fault anybody for seeing something and saying, we got to sweep. But I think you have to look back at the record and say, what has the council and what are the policymakers said on this? And then if there is a suggestion, the suggestion should come, the proper protocol, I think, is suggestion comes to us. I strongly advise you to change the decision you've made, and here's the heads up. What would you like to do rather than deciding to sweep it without even letting us know? We found out as the
Who is that entity? Who is that individual?
made up of folks. We have CLA representative on there. We have CAO representative. We have mayor staff. We have others.
So we're all in this together.
But
The
we had,
council was not
and-
notified of those decisions.
And we adopted as part of the budget last year, specifically recognizing this was a unique situation, that it would not be part of that managed hiring process. And so I question whether or not we had to go through that at all, because we've given them the authority. And I think the department be able to respond, but they found out in December. There were 6 months that we lost by not taking that action, and we should have been able to have hired them earlier.
And the reason why I'm asking is that I believe this is a symptom of a structural issue we have as we go through this process of dealing with our departments and how personnel's dealt with and how we move more efficiently. I think it's just a glimpse of something that needs to be paid attention to, and we can't wait for a crisis for it to happen or incident like this. So I just want to put that out on the table.
Thank you.
Mr. Zhang?
Well, I'm not surprised. Because when you start examining, you find out oftentimes the policies aren't followed. And in this particular situation, which is very distressing, especially for the victims. But some technical questions. Can the district attorney use for prosecution the evidence from an outside lab before it's retested LAPD?
No, they always retest before they go to trial. It is always retested by LAPD, even if they've, and I correct me if I'm looking over at them, but even if they've educated me, even if they've tested it once, they will retest it before they go to trial again.
So if LAPD does the initial test, are they required to do a secondary test with LAPD
Just before the trial.
before the trial? Okay. So the DA will not even file a charge from the outside
They'll
test?
file it.
He'll file it? Well, they can't, they only have a certain amount of time. Let's get some technical expertise.
Yeah.
Because what troubles me is that we're spending about $1,000+ for the outside test, cell marker, whatever other operations doing it. We're spending about $1,000, am I correct, $1,000+ per test?
That's right.
And if we're doing thousands of tests, that's a lot of money going out. And then we got to retest it inside. The outside test, can the DA use that as evidence to start a prosecution?
Quite how it works. What happens is we do the test on the evidence. It's checked against the database of all profiles that are in CODIS. If we get a hit, and we find a suspect, then we have to get a swab from that suspect to verify before it can go to actual trial.
But what if you have a
Now-
suspect in custody and evidence from that particular crime that's captured by the detectives through the test at the time after the crime, immediately after? You've got that DNA evidence. I'm talking about that for going to an outside lab for analysis. Will the DA prosecute based on that information from an outside lab? Or do they have to wait till it comes back to LAPD and gets retested?
We can't get a hit unless we verify it and upload it. And I need to clarify that also. When we send something out to the contractor, when the results come back, we verify those results. We do not retest that sample. So I want to make sure that that's clear.
Now, how long does it take to verify?
Can take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours per sample.
And if we do it inside, within LAPD, or the joint
Part of
lab?
our process already, so it's not an added burden to us. We're already doing that.
So we could expedite it by doing it inside, obviously.
Yes.
Okay. So the money that we're spending for outside testing, that then requires us to verify to do a secondary test inside, what's the cost of us doing the test inside with our chemist?
I don't have that number. Greg, do you have an approximation? Yeah.
Well, see, I'm just thinking, if we have inside people working on overtime to catch up on this backlog, versus out to the private contractors to expedite the process, to get it more tested, because you're not going to have as you spend as much inside as you are outside, and then clear up the backlog. To me, it seems ridiculous that we're sending it out, and it's got to come back. And I didn't read until this report that we have to do a second analysis when it comes back to us to verify, whether it be 2 hours or 4 hours or 8 hours. That's my concern, is we're spending money and time, and for the victims who want to see justice, and the detectives that get the suspect, and the DA that wants to prosecute, and the judge who wants to put this person in jail, to do that in a manner where we can catch as many and push them through the system. It seems like we're bogging this down by this outside testing operation.
Well, we did it. I forgot I need to state my name here. Yvette Sanchez Owens, LAPD SID. The reason we started this whole program of outsourcing was because we didn't have the in-house capacity. We had a gigantic backlog that we knew we couldn't address in a timely manner because there are statutes, and that's why we opted to do a two-pronged approach. One, to build our in-house capacity, but then also to outsource so we don't lose any on statute.
I can understand the one on statute, but it seems with our new joint use lab that they have at East LA College, and with the money, if we spend $3 million on outside testing, how much of that we could use for inside testing with personnel on overtime instead of furlough time? How we could have maybe got ahead of the numbers?
We still don't have the in-house capacity to handle it.
Yeah.
You still don't with the new lab?
Well, that was the idea, Mr. Zine. That, unfortunately, because we're behind, that's why. None of us want to see those 2 months of outsource. It wouldn't be my first preference. It wouldn't be the controllers. I don't think it would be the departments. The department's recommending that just because even with overtime right now, they don't have the capacity, and we want to make sure those statutes don't run. In the meantime, hire, so we can...
Well, that's the other part, the fact that we authorized the hiring at 26, right, and they still haven't been hired, and we've heard there's 90 on a list, and we don't want to stimulate the economy. Those are 90 people looking for jobs. We want to hire 26. Mr. Obama would love that. That would help the economy. So the double testing or the double verification, when we finally get caught up, do we plan to just do it in-house and not contract out to an outside vendor?
Yes, that has been the whole plan all along. It was a 4-year plan. We're in phase 3 of that 4-year plan. If we got all 26 plus the 10 we are putting in for next year, within about a year to 2 years after we got all those positions hired and trained, we would be handling everything contemporary and relying significantly less on outsourcing.
And then when you have those folks in place, because I know this happened with the state lab, they left the state lab to go to the private contractors because they were paying more. Are we competitive so we can keep these folks here so they won't jump ship and go someplace else?
Yes, we are very competitive. The state lab was one of the lowest paying agencies.
They were losing a lot of folks.
Yes, they were.
To the private vendors.
Yes, they were.
Mr. Zine, I think one of the issues, too, is that there were Los Angeles is not unique in the fact of having these backlog. We're probably the most public of people knowing, so that there is quite a demand for these outside contractors as well. And one of the reasons why I think Jerry Taylor said we're at the mercy sometimes of them, because they have a lot of demand for their services, and why hiring in is a better sense for us than doing that outside, because you really are at their mercy as they're being able to test those versus us being able to do them.
And actually, because of the national demand now, those private labs are backing up too. So
yes.
I understand New York had a massive backlog and they've cleared it up, and their backlog has been eliminated through. And maybe with these 26 folks on board, we can be successful in that.
It is the plan with these 26 to eventually, when we narrow the gap down and eliminate the backlog, that will then allow us to maintain the level of rapes that we get on an annualized basis, unless there's a big change in that number, on a go-forward basis, and begin to attack some of the other property crimes and others that we have DNA on that we could go for.
So there's obviously murders and other serious crimes that are investigated with DNA. Will this just take care of the rape situation?
No.
And it'll take care of the other serious Part 1 crimes also?
We're doing both simultaneously.
We're doing homicide now and rape.
We do the homicides now.
And selective choice, we did a few examples on property crimes. But in the near term, we'll be able then to handle all the annual cases of rapes, all the annual homicides, and begin to work on then backlogs of other property crimes that exist.
That's correct.
There's a total backlog of all kind of crime with the DNA. There's some DNA evidence. What's the total number of that? All categories.
That I don't.
Thousands in homicide.
75,000?
That I don't know.
Well, I've heard it's up in there in that arena.
Property crime.
Property crimes, all types of crimes where they have evidence that's
I don't have.
waiting to be
I think
tested.
it's homicides, a few thousand.
Well, if you don't have it, who would have it? Your section should have it, shouldn't it?
We don't necessarily know.
Not her
Well,
section.
somebody's got to know something.
That's not her section.
Good morning, Assistant Chief Mike Moore with Operations, Office of Special Operations. And Councilman, today we came prepared to talk about the controllers report items 2, 3, and 4. We'd be happy to look at our inventory of evidence in our lockers as to those that have been set aside and identified for serology, and come back to you if that's your desire.
I'd like to find that total number out, please.
Okay. As the department's response to this began some years ago, it has primarily focused on the instances of sexual assault kits, and while recognizing that we have serology and evidence that is booked and awaiting analysis on other violent crimes to include homicide and assaults, other types of assaults, as well as property crimes. The department was one of the test cities for a property DNA initiative that was 2 years ago. It was a $1 million project. The department has performed as one of those 5 cities in one of the best manners, and was recently recognized at IACP conference for its completion of that demonstration project, which says that DNA is really in the 21st century what fingerprints were 100 years ago. And in property crimes, it identified, I believe, some 40% of the time known offenders, felony offenders that would not have otherwise been identified. And and I was particularly a recipient of that as a benefactor in the San Fernando Valley, because we were very aggressive in the utilization of that project. But we recognize, as we do have to have goal sacrificing, that we do have to, because we do not have internal or even external capacity to handle all of the required testing, the expense of it, that we have to prioritize the backlog, and so we do that primarily with sexual assault kits, and then violence, and then we do get to certain types of property crimes on a case-by-case basis. Good morning, and if the council is prepared, or the committee is prepared, we'd be happy to launch into these other items.
I just have one more statement, that today begins the release of thousands of people from state prison back into Los Angeles and other communities of California. So with that in mind, and not a lot of job opportunities, we can anticipate that there'll be some possible increase in crime, and that this DNA situation will be more pressed to bring about some justice. I just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe it's an item on your agenda. Captain Justin Eisenberg is here, actually, with the chief from parole here for the LA region, is going to present information as to the department's response, as well as California State Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and their initiatives pending this new program. But let me, if I could, overarchingly provide that the department remains committed to a long-term hiring plan that allows us to do all required testing, the vast majority, with rare exception, for DNA, for all sexual assault kits. We also believe that this multi-phase hiring plan, which was earlier adopted, we're presently in phase 3, that upon its completion, that will maintain accreditation standards and supervision and quality control and capacity in-house to not only do the 1,200 estimate sexual assault kits each year, but also allow us to extend investigative and criminalist time into those other violent crimes I've talked about, and also property crimes at some point. The department, however, recognizes that even if, with the completion of this 4-phase process, that our capacity to analyze, for instance, property crime DNA is not within the borders of that. And so we want to remain clear that the program that's before you, that's been launched to this point, is primarily the sexual assault kits with some extension. It is not going to allow our capacity to exist for all violent crimes for instance, that would have a type of a turnaround that we're going to experience once we build for sexual assault kits. Secondly, we're here today, and we're very encouraged by the Managed Hiring Committee's approval of the unfreeze of 26 positions and the allowance for us to immediately begin the hiring process for 10 criminalists and a lab technician. It is our expectation that with an aggressive posture that we can have those positions filled and deployed and beginning their training, we're hopeful by May 1st. If we can do so sooner, we will exercise every effort to do so. But realistically, we believe, knowing our processes, including the background processes, and also recognizing the constraints that are on other parts of city government and completing portions of that, that it may be a May 1st date. Those 2 months, though, for the rest of this fiscal year, the monies that would be needed for those 10 plus 1 do not exhaust the monies that were set aside for the 26 original positions, and it is also our desire that the council support Councilman Garcetti's motion, which is to spend those monies and allocate those monies to contract services, which will allow us to continue testing a backlog that today we estimate at 1,254 untested sexual assault kits. Mr. Reyes.
You did have you made a statement where you're saying priority will be given to rape cases and it won't be addressing homicides or other types of cases?
We presently juggle the violent crimes cases, and so those testings do occur, but the priority has been to eliminate the backlog of these original 7,000 plus cases, plus the new cases for sexual assault kits that come in each year. So it's a constant balancing calibration.
Right.
Yeah,
And I just one more on the follow-up. So I understand the priority, and I agree with it, but you're saying that could adjust in the future based on how we make progress on these backlogs.
Yes, the expansion of these 10 criminalists as part of the 26 positions for this year, we would hope that we would, upon training those 26 and depending on their background and experience, we would be ready as soon as 6 months later to hire another grouping of criminalists, another 10, if you will, and that we would continue that until we fully populated the hiring plan. As those criminalists gain experience, they'll be able to work on active, as I understand, active production cases such as sexual assault kits, but also other cases, such as a robbery case or a serious aggravated assault case where DNA evidence was critical.
Now, hold my questions.
I was going to add to that, we just processed 2 weeks ago a $1.2 million grant on cold case homicide, and I was in the cold case homicide unit Friday, and they were using that money up as fast as they could. So there's another 300 or so cases they'll be able to process out of cold case homicide of a separate grant. So that is going on a separate track.
And the department is working with the mayor's office and council and CAO to pursue every grant opportunity for the elimination of these untested cases. If I might go back to items number 2, you talked about the inquiry of the department for reconciliation of the DNA database inventory, as well as the FBI requirement for outsourcing kits, and the FBI requirement for outsourced kits to be verified by a public entity such as LAPD's own lab. The notification criteria for alerting rape victims of changes in their cases. Quickly, in doing this, the reconciliation of the DNA inventory is an ongoing method. It has been reconciled. Today, we have personnel from SID, Property Division, and Robbery Homicide physically seated together in Robbery Homicide proper. Captain McClure oversees the process of, it's a combination of using 3 existing automated systems and a manual process of them reconciling the inventory, and they are presently also moving forward with the definition of a system that would, an automated system that would correct, if you will, and eliminate the need for the manual process. We are concerned about the funding that would be necessary to accomplish such an automated system. And so recognizing the need and agreement with Controller Gruhl as to the fact that we have to know a number and we need to maintain accuracy in that. We are using this manual process and we'll continue to focus on that. Additionally, we are going to be moving forward with the publishing of a monthly report that will, we have worked with Mr. Barbernal from Santa Monica Rape Treatment Center, the Human Rights Watch Group, and recognizing their need for public information on this, that our transparency is a desire of Chief Beck as well as the rest of the organization, and we will be, we are presently have collected what the Sheriff's Department is providing to the Board of Supervisors, our own internal report, and the desires of these two groups as to their advocacy of what they would like to see on the report, such as the verified numbers that remain. Once the outsourced kits come back, these have to be verified internally. What is that number? Such as today, it's approximately 1,700, that we would produce that data point in addition to the other data points that we've had on our internal reports. It is our expectation that that'll be accomplished here in the next 30 days, and we'll actually be pushing that information out on our web as well as distributing it to interested parties.
Chief, on that, let me ask you on that point, what will be the frequency of those reports?
At this point, very preliminary discussions with our own staff is encouraging those to be published every 30 days. Perfect. Because to do so more frequently, we get into an issue of churn, if you will, or just the status of the numbers don't change enough, or if they change because of a back and forth type situation, people become confused. So we're wanting to do this on a monthly basis. We believe that that's frequent enough to show progress or regression, as well as to be as transparent as possible.
When we changed committees last year, we said weekly reports were really binding the department of and really weren't producing much information for this committee. We switched to quarterly reports. I'd like to ask that we switch that to a quarterly public report to the council, but have a monthly transmittal of those numbers for this committee. And that would
very well
help us do our job and save you the trouble of coming over every week, which was not productive. So
very well.
All right, thank you.
Second aspect of your of item number 2 was the FBI requirement for the verification of outside contracted accredited labs and their results before it be accepted in a CODIS. We have asked formally the FBI on 2 occasions. They have denied us the most recent occasion with correspondence back. We have, as recently as a month ago, reapproached the bench, if you will, with Mr. Martinez, who's the Assistant Director for the LA office, again asking for them to reconsider this. We have heard the remarks of committee members this morning, as well as Councilman Gruhl, or Controller Gruhl and Councilman Garcetti, as to the desire to seek legislative support. We would inform you that the American Society of Criminalists there's associations out there that have similar positions of support, and as do those laboratories, the accredited outside laboratories, and so we're hopeful that there is a growing body of advocates that will hopefully change the mindset of the Bureau as to the CODIS database. Finally, as on this item, as item number 3, the notification of rape victims and their as to any change in their case status. Robbery homicide is a single point of entry and distribution of that. They are currently sending a certified mail letter to any victim that has a change in their sexual assault case. It is a nondescript letter. It is a letter that asks the victim to contact their investigator regarding a criminal investigation, and then we do a follow-up with that contact to include referrals to victim services advocacy groups to help them through their through this horrific ordeal that they've experienced, and just to check in as part of that process. That effort is going to continue into the future. It does include due diligence of computer system checks and so forth to try to locate people who do move. This is a challenge for us. We have had a number of instances where the address has come back unserviceable. The person is unable to be located. So we are making every effort to locate those individuals. Item number 3 was the aspect of this contract services and the hiring of criminalists. Again, we've heard today that the Managed Hiring Committee has afforded us the unfreeze as well as the 10+1 positions, and so I'll not repeat that. And then finally, there was a question regarding the status of our backlog today. We have approximately 1,254 untested sexual assault kits. In addition to those numbers, we have approximately 1,700 tested sexual assault kits that were outsourced. Those outsourced kits have come back with a CODIS finding that internal technicians within SID are presently verifying, and we are in pursuit of a $247,000 grant, an efficiency grant that is before the City Council now, that will allow us to pay overtime monies for those criminalists to work through that if you will backlog of verified but unuploaded CODIS reports. And finally, if there are any other questions, we would be happy to respond to them.
Okay. Thank you very much. Reyes? Mrs. Zine.
So that takes a total of 2,954. You add them both together. The ones that are outsourced and the 1,254 that we have within our lab. The question regarding outside labs, who certifies them?
We do an active RFP process.
No. Not our contract. Who certifies the outside labs?
We require in our RFP that they comply with ASCLD lab certification, which is the same certification that our lab acquires, and we only select labs that do comply with that.
Does the FBI certify our lab?
They don't do certifications.
Then why would the FBI require it to go through our lab if they don't certify, and not another lab that's certified as our lab is certified? I'm trying to figure out why the FBI maintains something on law enforcement
So are we.
that they don't maintain on the outside if they're not certifying anything. Because our lab meets the same standard as Cellmark, I assume. There's a national standard. So if they both meet the national standard, why is the FBI saying that outside lab doesn't qualify, but LAPD? What's the issue?
That's been our argument as well.
Yeah.
So there's no logic to it.
There's no
The
logic.
logic was, I believe, that they had to make a demarcation at some point, so they trusted law enforcement agencies initially and didn't trust the outside labs, because if you recall, at times there was problems.
We had problems inside, too.
Well, that's come out later. But I think the certification is done by an association of the criminalists. But I think as time goes by and this becomes more and more of less and less esoteric science and more a regular, repeatable science, that the pressure will be on the FBI to change that.
So it's just their decision to...
What? Oh, I'm sorry, Jerry Chaliff, Los Angeles Police Department. So I think that's where we are, and that's where the push is coming from, the local agencies to not have to go through this process, because the initial process right now has taken us months to get it back, because it takes 4 or 5 days to test us.
Right.
When we get it back, it takes us 2 to 4 hours.
And other than the FBI requirements, or any other state requirement from state DOJ or any others, just the FBI with their particular twist on that?
Right.
Okay.
They're the gatekeepers for the CODIS system.
Right.
So we're eliminating the backlog and creating a new backlog, thanks to the federal government.
But it's an easier backlog to deal with, hopefully.
Yeah, it's a do-over. All right, thank you very much. Let's have public comments now. Have Shana Campbell, Julie Butcher, Mary Garvey, and Sherry Linewan. Please come forward.
Who wants to go first?
Anyone?
I'll go first. My name is Sherry Linewand. I'm a co-chair of the local committee of Human Rights Watch. I'm here with my colleague, Mary Garvey, another volunteer committee member of Human Rights Watch. First of all, I appreciate you having this hearing and putting these items on the agenda and the motions that have been placed. Also appreciate hearing that the Managed Hiring Committee changed its position late last Friday in response to awareness of the decision they had previously made. I'd like to make 2 points, really consistent with what you've already heard. We had prepared comments. They've gone out the window with what we've heard today. First of all, as City Council President Eric Garcetti noted, the City Council was not given a heads up about the decision that was made, and that's unacceptable. And as we have urged the City Council, and we appreciate your comments today, Chairman Smith, oversight is required. And we believe that that does require monthly reporting to the Public Safety Committee, written report, as well as testimony by the LAPD on where they stand on both backlog issues, uploading issues, and hiring issues, and also quarterly reporting, as you have suggested, to the full City Council, both written and verbal, along the same lines. And the other item is that the crime lab personnel needs to be hired urgently. And that needs to be a focus of the Los Angeles Police Department. It's surprising to me that they did not know until December that these positions authorized last April and May were not going to be authorized. And we hope for your oversight on that. The last thing I might mention, I am not an expert in constitutional law, but I believe there is a U.S. Supreme Court case that, in response to your questioning, Councilman Zine, that deals with testifying at trial when you're bringing in forensic evidence. And that might also lend towards having more testing done by in-house as opposed to outsourcing because of having to provide witnesses to show the chain of title in effect on that testing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Garvey. I'm with Human Rights Watch as well. I would like to actually applaud LAPD and the council for moving forward rapidly on this with the release of our report regarding the situation. I have personally met with the California delegation, both in the Senate, both in the House, and also had meetings with the White House regarding this issue. And as a community, both with the PD, the council, the city, Los Angeles has an opportunity to step forward and be a national leader on reducing or increasing justice for women on this issue. Human Rights Watch has often pointed to New York as a model on how to reduce this backlog, both in reporting and both getting the testing done. As a citizen of this city, I would like to see the national government look to us and say they heard the message, they solved it effectively, cost effectively, and they moved rapidly on it. And there is momentum for this. As Councilman Garcetti mentioned, there is national legislation coming down the pipe that will end up requiring testing, and if we can get out in front of it, more power. So,
do you know who's going to carry that bill?
Mahoney, I believe it's Representative Mahoney in the House, and there are a number of co-signers, and we have a list of the congressional delegation in California who we would like to sign on. Some have, Congressman Waxman has, but there are others in the local area who have not, so we could get that to you.
Please do. Yeah, we're going to be going there March 13th, 14th, something like that.
We'll do that.
Thank you.
And on the Senate side, it's in the Judiciary Committee. Franken is sponsoring it, but Feinstein is signed on as a member of Judiciary. It's bipartisan support. Hatch is signed on to it. Greeley is signed. It's sitting there waiting for lots of support and lobbying. So
thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Shana Campbell. I'm from Peace Over Violence, a local rape crisis and domestic violence center serving Los Angeles community for more than 38 years. And we actually just wanted to come and support item 3 as a temporary solution to eliminating the backlog by outsourcing kits. But we do see it as an extraordinarily temporary solution. And more so than item 3, we support the hiring of these 26 criminalists to swiftly ensure that we don't recreate the backlog and that every victim's voice is heard. Further, we support City Controller Gruel's statement that the procedures, including victim notification, need to be standardized between the Sheriff's Department and LAPD. And the best way to do that, we believe, is through the continued cooperation of City Council, law enforcement, and victim advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Julie Butcher and Mary Gar. I got Mary here twice. Yeah.
Good morning. Julie Butcher, SEIU, Local 721. SEIU was certified as the union for the city's professional criminalists in late November. So we are learning these issues. Generally, we would rather be with you walking those halls in D.C., figuring out how, for instance, to use federal money for civilians as well. We think that's much more common interest than trying to figure out how to outsource work that should be done in-house. These are committed scientists, the civilians that work for the city. They want to get this work done. They want to make sure that these women get justice. We believe, the workers believe, that we can maximize the availability of work, one, by eliminating the furloughs that have been, these folks have been furloughed 10%. So overnight, tomorrow, you could increase your productivity of this work by 10% by simply unfurloughing workers at the same time that you hire them. These workers work Monday through Friday, 8-hour shifts. In a city that never sleeps, in a police department that needs to fight crime 24/7. We bought very, very expensive equipment, built a beautiful lab, and use it 40 hours a week. And that is, frankly, outrageous. So, rather than contracting out work at twice the cost, and then have to check it again when we bring it back in-house, we believe immediately we could unfurlough these workers, work together with you all to come up with a schedule that actually supports this critical work. And if you want to hire, that's up to you all, but we don't believe it's necessary. The first thing we should do is immediately end furloughs and immediately put these folks to work, not on overtime, but on straight time in a schedule that actually supports fighting crime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you would submit that in a written form for me.
We have.
Thank you. And I would ask the police department, first of all, and the CAO to come back with recommendations on these recommendations. I know many years ago when we bought the first APHIS machine, I think it was either 1 or 2. We ended up buying 3 or 4, but we ended up hiring 3 shifts a day to run those machines because the machines cost a lot more than the people to run them. And as she said, it's a 24-hour department. So we ran 3 shifts a day and used the machines constantly rather than buying lots of machines. So,
and Councilman, in the interest of saving written reports and time and the aspect, if we have the ability to answer this for you today, it would help. And again, in this process, we are encouraged, and I just had an opportunity to meet Ms. Butcher, and we will look forward to any recommendation as to our means of improving our efficiencies. But as to the concept that the present lab is working 40 hours a week and has at least double or triple the capacity because of those unused hours, I'd like to clarify that, and Ms. Sanchez-Owens is with me as the commanding officer of SID, can respond to that.
Right now we're using we're planning to use the grant that's before you, and it's an efficiency grant that we solicited from the federal government to address the secondary backlog. We were planning originally, when our criminalists were working 40-hour weeks, to pay them overtime and to also contract out part of that work to another crime lab, Santa Clara, on an overtime basis. With the furloughs, instead, we're planning to use our in-house staff on their furlough day at straight time against that grant to do those verifications. The other problem with going 24/7 is that a lot of those machines are running those tests through the night, so there really is nothing that a human person standing there could do through the night. So the machines are running those tests all through the night.
So you're downloading and it's just processing.
Exactly.
24/7, basically.
Exactly.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, thank you.
I've got a follow-up question. The outsource issue, there's always that, as Chief knows, the chain of evidence, the custody. How often, and I don't know where we're sending this, lab's obviously not in our backyard, how often do we lose any kind of evidence that gets lost because it got lost in the mail, it got misplaced? How often does that happen? And also the continuity, the chain of evidence, if an individual is identified and DNA is utilized, do we then have to subpoena those people from the outside lab to come testify, plus our people inside?
Yes, you're absolutely right. None of the labs that we contract with, and there are 4, are in our backyard. We do send everything out. I've been here almost 4 years as the CO of SID, and we have not lost anything in my tenure. I don't know about any time before that. Occasionally, Occasionally, the courts will require the actual analyst that performed the analysis to come to court and testify, and in those cases, the city pays for them to come out to testify. So that's an added cost associated with outsourcing.
So where are the labs located that we contract with? Just the city?
One is up north, one is in Texas, one is back east somewhere, and I forgot where the fourth one is.
Tennessee.
Tennessee. So we would then pay for their airfare, their lodging, incidentals while they come testify?
Absolutely.
Clarification on that, and that is pre-trial. At the preliminary hearing, that is the responsibility of the city. Once it goes to trial, it's my understanding that the jury trial, so to speak, or a full trial would be an obligation of the district attorney's office.
So the county would pay?
County would pay. But the point is well taken, which is, again, it's an attribute of an outside contract, and again, the department's desire is to add this capacity internally for a myriad of reasons, not of efficiency and capability and dependability, and not be subject to the changing tides of an outside contractor, and not the least of which is to recognize that we control our destiny in that manner rather than a private company who may be subject to their own controversy regarding their standards.
And I will say that with this budget crisis that we're facing and getting worse every day, that we need to be cognizant of that. Anytime we can save money and still get the job done, we need to recognize that issue also. Thank you. Very well.
Okay. Other public comments are from Beth Cranston and Geraldine Stapleton.
Good morning. My name is Beth Cranston, and I'm legal counsel at the Rape Treatment Center at Santa Monica UCLA Medical Center. Much of what I came here to urge you to do has already been taken care of, so I'll make my comments very brief. I want to thank the committee for hearing this issue today and really grappling with the issues at hand. While we support the proposed interim solution that's being proposed by Mr. Garcetti, it is really critical for the LAPD Crime Lab to have the capacity to timely test every rape kit that comes into their possession. When these rape kits are opened and an offender's DNA is found, they can be apprehended. So what's happening by the fact that the current status of not testing rape kits or long delays means that we are leaving dangerous offenders on the street that don't need to be on the street. And please understand that these offenders, who we could identify with science today, are on the streets and they are committing further crimes, rapes that could be prevented. So we urge you, as someone who works at the Rape Treatment Center and sees patients every day, we urge you to comprehend the incredibly grave risks to society, to our city, to your constituents on the street today when there are rapists out there that can be identified. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Geraldine Stapleton. I'm the convener and co-founder of the Hollywood chapter of the National Organization for Women and its immediate past executive VP. I also chair the Peace and Safety Committee for California Now. I'm here to speak in favor of Council President Garcetti's motion 10-0089. I also, on a personal note, happen to be a rape survivor, so I know firsthand the problems and the difficulties that are occurred by going through this experience. So I guess I'm speaking on behalf of the thousands of rape victims who have not had their kits tested. I can't impress upon you the importance that it is, for these victims to be able to become a survivor, like I'm grateful to be, and not still in the victim mode. So anything that can be done in terms of continuing the funding, in terms of having ongoing personnel on staff to do the testing in-house, so once the backlog gets caught up, that it is continued on in a timely manner, because we have cases that are now going by the wayside because of the statute of limitations running out. And for these women, it's like a slap in the face. It's like you don't care what has happened to them. I personally know that the wounds heal, but the scars last a lifetime. So, and I would like to point out also, which I don't think has been mentioned in prior hearings, that it would actually save the Los Angeles city a lot of money in terms of being sued for wrongful convictions. So if you have, if you have your evidence there in front of these cases, it would save millions of dollars in paying out those lawsuits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, do you have any other questions, Mr. Zine, Mr. Reyes? Okay, I would suggest then we go forward with the CAO report as amended, and that was an amendment regarding the timely reporting on a monthly and quarterly basis. And add, if there's no objection, that we ask the police department to contact the personnel department, that as we don't have a need for the next regular officer class, and it looks like we're not going to have one for a month or two maybe, that they switch their backgrounds research people over to doing these 26 and 10 right away and give that the priority. So if there's no objection to that.
Mr. President, Mr. Chair, I think that they're anticipating a class in March, if I'm not mistaken. A police recruit class in March.
Whenever we find that time, if we don't have a class.
Jerry Chaliff, Los Angeles Police Department, I believe we already have a sufficient group to fill the class without further background checks. And we, based on the formula, I believe, which will be back probably in a week or two, we will have a need for a class.
But I said, as that happens, if there's not a class, then switch over those personnel to doing that first.
We can also tell them to prioritize.
Yeah. That's very good. So that'll be the order. Thank you very much. That concludes today's regular agenda, except for one public comment. We do have a special item, folks, so don't leave yet, Mr. Zine. Dr. Williams, we'll hear from you now in your public comment, and then we'll go to the special agenda. Dr. Williams here? Seeing none, that ends today's regular meeting. Now we'll go into the special meeting. Item number 1.
Item 1, verbal presentation from the Police Department relative to strategies to respond to California prison reform and the resulting release of prisoners.
Morning, sir. How are you? Good.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Kat.
How you doing?
All right, good morning. With me, I've got to my left Chief Deputy Parole Administrator Maria Franco from CDCR and Director Guillermo Cespedes from the Mayor's Grid Office. And we all have something to comment on regarding this issue.
Go ahead.
What I'd like to cover is, I'm Captain Justin Eisenberg from LAPD Gang and Narcotics Division. What I'd like to comment on is what we know now and what some of our current strategies are to deal with parolees in the city of Los Angeles and how we're going to address the non-revocable parolees that we're anticipating, and then some future strategies that we're exploring for 2010 that we're engaged in various processes to deal with, particularly re-entry, which is a big challenge that this is going to pose. So as of today, January 25th, CDCR will institute non-revocable parole, and they're going to begin reviewing the files of many of those that are on supervised parole for change to the status of non-revocable parole. And to be a non-revocable parolee candidate, basically you're considered a non-serious offender, although you're in state prison. You're a violent offender, you're a non-sex offender. You're not a validated gang member in that you're not a member of a prison gang like the Mexican Mafia or Black Gorilla family, although you may have been a gang member on the streets before you're in custody. You're considered a lower or moderate risk offender, and you haven't committed a serious in-custody offense. And I know the Chief is going to comment further on this process of how they're going to evaluate the risk of those offenders before they release them, and some other steps that they're taking to screen these people. But in terms of the impact, what we expect in the city of Los Angeles and LA County combined is about 21,000 parolees in 2010 to be released. Some percentage of those 21,000 parolees are going to be screened and reclassified as non-revocable parolees. The difference with a regular supervised parolee and a non-revocable parolee essentially is that if you're a non-revocable parolee, you're not subject to supervision by parole. Your parole is not revocable. You are subject to search conditions at any time by a law enforcement officer. You have that condition. but you're not supervised as a normal parolee would be for 3 years.
Search for, you say for 2 years?
At least a year. Search and seizure for a year.
Only a year?
Yes. And I'll let the chief comment further on more specifics if misspoke on that, but my understanding is 1 year for search conditions. And there are some other conditions that some of these NRPs might have to fulfill, particularly if they were a batterer and they were convicted of domestic violence. There's some things that she's going to comment on. So what we're looking at is a population of about 6,000 individuals who are not going to be supervised, parolees that are going to be in our city or county this year. And there's going to be a process where they're going to be implementing this program in a pilot parole office that the chief will speak on in a moment. So in terms of the impact, as far as we see for the city of LA, I'll talk first about our current strategies that we have in place for dealing with parolees. And first, I'd like to comment on our Safer Cities initiative. I think when you look at this issue, it's going to have a big impact, I think, on the downtown Skid Row area. The Safer Cities area, which we would define as between 3rd and 9th and Hill and Alameda, we have a nice contingent of officers that have a lot of expertise. There's 47 police officers that are in that area, and they deal with parolees on a daily basis. There's just about 900 parolees or so, or 800, correction, in that Skid Row area right now. And because the problems are so acute in that area, they formed up a parolee tracking unit several months ago. And those officers are specifically committed and dedicated to tracking the parolees within the Skid Row area and working very closely with CDCR to ensure that they're not violating the law. Since that program's been in place, the Safer Cities Initiative in Central, which was established in June of 2006, we've had great results. We've had about a 42% reduction in Part 1 crime in the Skid Row area with that force in place. I think that this is going to strain that, and it's going to be a challenge for the Skid Row area, this issue. What we've seen is a bit of an increase in the homeless population already in the Skid Row area. The last count I had was there's about 1,014 living on the streets there. And with that slight increase that we're already seeing, I think that this issue could put a bit of a strain and a challenge on particularly the resources, the Central City and Central area and Skid Row area. Another thing that we do that's in place that is the current strategy is pretty much department-wide. At each area, we have representation at these parolee orientation meetings where we go to the parole office and we meet with the outgoing parolees, and we get a sense of who's coming out into which communities. Each area might handle it differently. Some it's handled at a bureau level, some by an area level. But we're very active in terms of identifying who's coming out and when and which area they might impact. Also, we have very good relationships already with CDCR, with probation, and with a lot of federal agencies, and we do a lot of multi-agency task forces already that target queer criminals and gang members, and we're going to continue to do those things. And I think it's a testament to my colleague here from CDCR that she's here with us, and she knows she might be taking some hard questions. But we're partners on the ground level here in the city and in the county. We work real closely together. Also, she's going to comment more on some of the issues or some of the things they have in place to deal with these high control parolees at large. But these high control parolees, we have about 1,300 in the city. And these are pretty violent offenders. Some are sex offenders, some are parolees, some are wanted. An example of one of these individuals would be like the suspect in that Oakland shooting that killed 4 police officers. That was a high control PAL that they were actively seeking. That is a high threat individual, gang member type that, you need to have dedicated folks that are pursuing. They're going to stand up some additional teams, and the chief's going to comment on that. But we already work very closely at Gang Narcotics Division with CDCR and going after these types of individuals. Also, our Racer Division, which is downtown, they have the ability through what's called the Veritrack system to track GPS-equipped parolees. And currently, they track about 40 gang member GPS-equipped parolees, and they track about 460 sex offenders. And they use this on a daily basis. So they monitor the hotshot calls that are coming out, and then they'll go into the system and they'll see, is there a GPS parolee in the area of this call? They also do a lot of historical runs. They work with the detectives, and they run tracks to see where GPS parolees have been moving around. And they've solved homicides with this system. It's routine now for them to come up with good leads for detectives, but they've actually encountered a GPS monitored parolee involved in a homicide, and they were able to put that together through the Veritrack system.
But none of these releases are going to be those people.
Negative. No, these are some things that are in place with your supervised parolees, And some of the things that the chief from CDCR will comment on is some of their enhancements to these capabilities. And I'm not going to steal all of our thunder, but there's going to be an improvement and enhancement with that as well that will help us with some of the more high-risk offenders. We also, in terms of our sex offenders, we have about 960 sex offenders in the city that we monitor, and we have dedicated REACT officers that we know these are 290 sex offenders, but our REACT teams are constantly tracking those individuals and monitoring them, and some of these people will be GPS equipped as well. We also are participating in the CCJCC forum with all the major agencies in the county, and they're doing some reporting on this prison reform issue and what the impacts could be, and we're collaborating with them. And I want to digress for a moment because it seems to be a little confusion about two issues which are related but slightly different that are occurring with prison reform that impact us. Issue one is that there was a 3-judge federal panel that mandated the state to release about 40,000 inmates in the next 2 years, and that's an estimate. The state appealed that to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court basically put that order on hold, and for about a year they're going to review it. They said basically that the 3-judge panel did not overstate their authority by ordering that release. However, they're going to evaluate this request, and there's going to be about a year period before we might see that impact us. That's one issue. The other issue is, as of today, there's a new section, 3000.03 of the Penal Code, which allows for non-revocable parole to be granted to people. And that is a second issue, though related, it's a second issue. What that means is essentially people that were on supervised parole are no longer going to be supervised. So those are two things that are occurring simultaneously. They both have an impact, and they both equate to some increase in the parole population that we can expect in the city and the county. In terms of how we're going to keep track of who these individuals are, CDCR is going to take a photo of them, and they're going to get a DNA sample when they leave. And that photo is going to be uploaded into the Parolee Lead system. The Parolee Lead system is an automated database that we routinely use in our investigations. Also, when officers are in the field and they encounter an individual, they could run them on their mobile digital terminal, and they would get a return that would indicate this is an NRP, which means they're subject to a search condition. So the Parolee Lead system is in place, and CDCR is looking at some enhancements to that as well. What I'd like to talk about next is some future strategies that we're looking at for 2010. One of the things that we're very concerned about is that we have made a lot of strides at reducing crime and homicides, and this could put a strain on some of our efforts to contain some people and have a good deterrent effect on those that are committing crimes and are some of our repeat offenders. But we're also looking out at some other strategies, some innovative strategies that other communities are using to deter and prevent and change behavior so we don't have to arrest them. We've reached out to John Jay College in New York, and there's a professor there named David Kennedy. David Kennedy used to be from Harvard, and he's kind of well known for the Operation Ceasefire project in Boston, or the Boston Gun Project. I'm sure everybody's heard of that. Anyway, he's going to come out here, and we're going to meet with him. We're having a conference call with him tomorrow, but he's going to come out. We're going to do a pilot in Mission area on an Operation Ceasefire model. And essentially how this worked is the most current example of this program is in Chicago right now. In Chicago in 2002, they started a reentry strategy based on this gang violence reduction model, or an Operation Ceasefire model. And essentially what they did is they looked at about a 24 neighborhood area on the west side of Chicago where they had the most problems with gang crimes. They identified about the 1,500 most violent offenders, and they began these offender notification forums. And what they did in these forums is that they basically held these multi-agency meetings on a regular basis with law enforcement, with the police, with the U.S. Attorney, with the DA, with the DEA, with the ATF, all the major players, with the major offenders. And then they also had the folks from the intervention side present, and then the social service providers. And the purpose of it was to basically communicate that there will be severe consequences if you continue your behavior, and you have some alternative choices that you can make if you don't want to continue that, and then follow through that with some real consequences for those individuals, and continue to have these meetings. So the results that they had were somewhat promising in that they had a 37% reduction in homicides in those areas, and 30% reduction in recidivism for that population of offenders. And our recidivism rate in LA County is pretty abysmal. It's about 50% within 3 years that these folks that are parolees commit additional crimes and end up back in prison. And 85% of those folks that do end up back in prison for violating their parole are really for technical violations 85% of the time. The rest is new charges. So we're exploring ways to reduce that statistic, to improve the rate of recidivism within our city, and to really deal with the most violent impact individuals that are committing the most crime. So that's a pilot we're going to do in Mission this year. Also, we're working very closely with the GRID office, and they're looking at the Honor and Strength program in South Bureau to see what they can do to get more impact out of that program and find additional funding for that. And I'll let Director speak on that from the GRID office. Lastly, one of the issues that we're very concerned about is that some of these non-revocable parolees, some percentage are going to be mentally ill. Some are going to be what they call EOPs, enhanced outpatient parolees. And those people are in pretty bad shape. The other group is, they call us triple CMS parolees, and they're less severely mentally ill. And I've talked to the chief about this issue, and they have some plans in place in that they're going to allow these folks to continue to get outpatient services at the parole offices for about 90 days. But there is going to be a period of transition where they're hoping to transition these mentally ill individuals into our mental health facilities and services. So in terms of what we're doing at LAPD about that is we have a mental evaluation unit already in place. They have something called the CAMP system. It's a case management program in which they enter information on the most continued mentally ill individuals that we're dealing with that really need services. They have a way to track those individuals and get them into the services that are available to them. Our plan is to enter NRP parolees into the CAMP system so we can keep track of them. But the mentally ill piece is going to put a strain, I think, on the system and on the county in particular. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the chief and the director if they have anything further they'd like to add and comment on their pieces.
You did an excellent job.
Sure. This is clearly going to test. This is clearly going to test the.
Give your name for the record.
I'm sorry. For the record, my name is Guillermo Cespedes. I'm the director of the Office of Gang Reduction and Youth Development.
Thank you.
This is clearly going to test the relationships that we have on the ground, specifically in the gang reduction youth development zones. So our strategy in dealing with what I think is a bit of a crisis is to make sure that we link up and have an understanding of who is being released into the gang reduction zones. Obviously, those who are gang affiliated, those who are involved with street gangs primarily. So what we're doing is that we have a total capacity of about 690 case management slots throughout the city. Some of those numbers are fluid because they may be filled at a particular time. At this point, there are two areas that we're trying to provide services in. One is identify who those individuals are, grab a hold of them through our intervention agencies and refer them for wraparound services. Some of those wraparound services include job training and job placement through CDD. In addition to that, we're working with South Bureau in expanding or restructuring the Honor and Strength program, the reentry program that was put together, referred to as the Kenny Gardner program. And we're trying to both look at the programmatic structure of that and how we can develop additional funding for it. At this point, most of our work will be in providing wraparound services in the grid zone and to some degree trying to protect the work that we've done in the grid zones in terms of keeping crime reduction down. And I think that's going to require really a close collaboration in terms of understanding who is coming in.
Maria Franco, Chief Deputy Parole Administrator with the California Department of Corrections, Adult Parole. Thank you, Captain, for inviting me here today. Non-revocable parole. We recognize, the Department recognizes the community's concern, serious concern, not only in your city but statewide. The Department of Corrections is committed to continue to work with our community partners as we have in the past on all ventures. You talked about search and seizure. There is a population known as MNRP, which will be monitored. But non-revocable parolees will still be mandated to meet all of the statutory requirements of the Penal Code. The monitored non-revocable parolees will be those who were convicted of a domestic violence offense. So they will still be required to meet the 52-week batters program statutory requirement, and they will be monitored. They will be assigned to a monitoring team. Of the 6,000, that numbers varies. You hear the media anywhere from 6,000, 6,500. At this point, we have 2 strike teams in Northern California as well as Southern California in our records department. Our intent is not to leave no stone unturned. The 6,000 initially, the number that the names that you have, I think we generated that list, is a preliminary list. We are physically going through every central file, and just to kind of give you an idea, a parolee, when he's convicted to state prison, he has a probation officer's report, and he has a whole historical bio of his criminality, his criminal offense, his social factors and such. Well, that is not part of the parole file per se, inclusive of everything. The parole file is just a field file that a parole agent utilizes from his release from prison with some court documents, but it's not inclusive of his entire history and record, including social factors. So what we have is we have a strike team who's actually going to look at that central file that follows an inmate from state prison out to the community. Part of what NRP will do is we also have a additional criteria excluding individuals that does not limit that to 1192.5 or 667.5. But, for example, if they have had an in-custody misconduct, and what we have is a serious rules violation, if they've been disruptive, if they've been assaulted, even if they were committed for a nonviolent offense to state prison, they will be excluded from NRP. That's not being captured by the database that gave you your initial 6,500 names. So that number we feel will be restricted even further. So it'll be a smaller number initially. So the department is committed to making sure that we properly review every individual file. In addition to that, we're committed to ensure that communication is paramount to your local gang directors here and reentry partners to ensure that you know who is eligible for NRP or who was paroled. Now, we are assessing individuals, I think there's another number of 22,000 for the year. Those include the 6,000 that are on active parole. And again, they have to be reviewed for eligibility for NRP. To say 22,000, if they're still incarcerated and there's a serious rules violation, then they'll be excluded upon their parole. So it's very difficult to give you an exact concrete number of who those individuals are that meet the criteria. Those that are not on our NRP, parole will continue to supervise, and our intent is to supervise more effectively. We'll be dealing with the serious and violent offenders at a caseload ratio from 70 to 1 originally to 48 to 1. That will give the parole agent more of an availability to properly supervise your high-risk offenders. In addition to that, we will be activating 50 additional gang GPS caseloads in your city and county. We currently have 2. We have one on the south end in the Watts area out of the Huntington Park Parole Office who supervises 20 of the most violent gang members on parole in that area in collaboration with LASO and Century Division. It's been extremely effective. We have another gang caseload here in the Alameda corridor that works very closely with Central Division. Captain Chow, I believe, is Captain Chow's out of that division, who's worked effectively to address the 20 most violent in that area. We will be activating an additional 50 caseloads. So that is an additional 100 parolees that will be on active gang GPS. In addition to that, we will have enhanced in-home detention for 625 additional parolees as an intermediate sanction. In lieu of technical violations, in return for technical violations, we will be utilizing that very much like GPS, although it's radio frequency driven. So the department is activating EID in enhanced version as well as the gang GPS caseload. You mentioned, Captain, the mentally ill population. We have no intent of turning around those parolees that are mentally ill that meet the NRP criteria. If they report to the parole office and they require continued psychiatric care, medication, or counseling, we will continue to care for them while we transition to county mental health. They will not be turned around into Skid Row and let loose without any support whatsoever. We have internal mechanisms in place at every parole office that will have places for individuals who meet NRP who can be referred to county and city services. That will continue. That's not a departure from what we already do. So that's the mentally ill population. Victim notification, that will continue to be a requirement of those parolees under NRP. They will be notified that they will continue to be monitored. In addition to that, the victims will be notified that the parolee status has changed from your parole status to NRP status, and victims will know and have an ability to contact local law enforcement of any concerns that they may have on this issue. So they will be notified. Let's see, some other issues you may have brought up. We have the LEADS database. The external LEAD database that law enforcement has been utilizing for years will be enhanced. It will have a updated list of those parolees with a link for any law enforcement agency to log on and determine which parolees meet the NRP requirement. We will have a LEADS photo upon the release. We have photo capture machines in our prisons. They'll take a photo and they will be DNA sampled prior to release. Their information that they provide to the correctional counselors will be inputted into the database. However, the information will not be updated upon their parole, upon parole of NRP. Let's see. Talked about the reduction of the parole agent's caseload, 48 to 1. Let's see. Any questions?
Yeah, a few questions. Just briefly, when you say you're going to be sending back people, if you send back a person who violates the rules of parole, they get a recidivism, they go back. Does that necessitate then release of another person because this is being driven by the court saying you can't house that many people?
Good question. There are two different issues. The three-judge panel is dealing with overcrowding and population as a whole, not specifically non-revocable parole. And I think there lies the confusion. We're not doing a one-for-one. We're not going to impact public safety by saying, well, we're returning one, now you can release one. That's just not how it works. Overcrowding is entirely a different issue. Parole reform will assist in that venture, and in and of itself, not returning technical violators back to state prison. In the past, parole would be violated, and very often they would remain in local jails and would not go back to state prisons. So they're mutually exclusive of one another. However, dealing with the nonviolent offenders and not returning them to parole on parole technical violations will impact overcrowding.
What did you said a number, I didn't get it. What was the number of your agents' caseload going to change to?
48 to 1.
48 to 1. From what now?
70.
So it's going to go down.
Significantly.
Okay. It was said to me the other day that as many as 800 of the 6,000 will probably end up in the central city area of L.A. So your central divisions, Hollenbeck, Rampart, Newton, et cetera, going to bear a heavier load than the rest of the city.
Yes. Well, they currently have 800 in that area.
Right. So this would double that if that number is correct.
We expect we'll end up in the Skid Row area, so we'll probably see an increase in the parolee population in the Skid Row area. It's currently at about an 800 number right now.
Okay. When we get the information from CDC, is it going to say where their home address is, what their convictions was, so we know how to look for them, the folks you're working with, those units?
It will say that. However, it's not very accurate because it's captured upon their release, the NRP address of record, so they can tell you, give you an address, but it's not a verified address,
So they don't have to report back to CDC if they move like they do as a regular parolee?
No.
So once they go out, they can filter out anywhere or in anywhere, and we wouldn't necessarily know that.
Expect, based on historical trends and the services that are in the Skidwell area, we'll see them there, some percentage.
Okay. Right. Mr. Zhang?
Well, let me say this. I appreciate your information, your insight. I don't fault you. I don't fault the police department. I fault our courts. I fault our governor, our state legislature, our state senate for letting this potential disaster happen. When you take this amount of people and put them back in society that go to state prison, I got 41 years experience with LAPD. I worked the fugitive warrant detail. That's my captain. And I know what happens in state prison. And we're sending these people back to society without training, without jobs, without any opportunities, putting them back in the city of Los Angeles and other communities. It's disaster that is going to happen, and there's no question that we're giving these people no opportunities. Now, whether it's domestic violence or some other crimes that they've committed, I find that the ones who are going to be held accountable are those folks in Sacramento, not your department that's being mandated to do this. But it really frustrates me that we've reduced crime, we've maintained that, and all of a sudden there's going to see a surge because of what's taking place. And today, I think, launches the release of people from state prison. And I know you don't go to state prison for running a red light. You don't go to state prison for driving drunk. You go to state prison because you've done something terrible. You've been convicted by a court or by a jury. And a number of years ago, we built additional prisons to house the population, 3 strikes and you're out, et cetera. So now we're basically washing that away. As far as the issue of these folks coming back in your gang areas, is there any requirement that they participate in any kind of a program, or are they up to their option? I want to participate, I want to go back to the hood, I want to go apron again?
We don't make that determination. We basically will accept them into our programs. We're assuming we'll be able to engage them in the programs, but whether that's a requirement or not, I believe the chief will be best.
But there's no mandate for that. There's no requirement. In other words, they can come out of prison and go back to their activities that got them in prison in the first place, whether it be committing serious crime, violent crime, whatever the case. But in other words, there's no mandate that they participate in any type of training program or any type of employment. We're not opening the door to say we're going to give you an apprenticeship here. You're just coming back out of state prison, and where the cards fall, the cards fall. And if I'm wrong, correct that.
Well, no, you're correct. We don't have the ability to make that into a mandate.
Now, with the population, I heard 6,000, 6,500, 21,000. What do we anticipate coming into Los Angeles? Is it 21,000 coming into metropolitan Los Angeles?
That's a divide between the county and the city.
So
Total population, that's the LA County parole population.
So the entire county region, which includes the large cities and small cities.
That's correct.
They're not going to just, when they release them from prison, are they going to give them a bus ticket back to a location of their choice? Or are they going to come down to the Greyhound station, or how's that going to work?
They're still required to return to the county of commitment.
Okay.
So if they were convicted from LA County, they will be told they will be signing conditions of parole that tell them what their statutory requirements are, which is return to your county of last commitment. We will also advise them that they are not to leave the county, travel, they must have a permit. However, there's no sanction attached.
All right.
But they will still be notified of what their legal requirements are. Now, of the 6,000, it's important to recognize that they're not going to be all on NRP and identified tomorrow. This is a incremental, the rollout is going to be incremental because notifications take quite some time. So when you talk about the 21,000, that's going to be over a period of 2 years, of 24 months. As the captain noted a little earlier, we are starting with the San Gabriel Valley and as a pilot, 120 days to do all of our notifications. It's a very labor-intensive process. In the interim, if your law enforcement arrests someone who today, the law went into effect today, is eligible for NRP, We do not have the mechanism in place to immediately this day say, nope, release them out to the community. What we do is we want them to bring them into the system, and we will assess them at that time through our internal process, identify them, and do what we need to do to get them transitioned. So, it's important to realize that not today you're going to have 6,000 folks that are going to be running in your community with no parole supervision whatsoever. That will not be the case.
And they won't be on probation. They'll be totally, completely free. There won't be a parole, there won't be any probation. In other words, they won't have to report to anyone once they're released under the new condition.
They will not be reporting to anyone that they're on non-revocable parole, unless they receive a new prison term.
But they still have the 1-year requirement that if they violate the rules, they can, deal with it accordingly, either send them back or...
They will not automatically discharge from parole, their statutory parole requirement. That piece of the penal code has not been amended. They will not be able to discharge off parole until the 13th month. Those folks who do not meet the statutory requirement to complete the 52 batters program will be on monitored non-revocable parole for 3 years. They will not fall off after 13 months.
Now, you mentioned domestic violence. What type of other felonies are we talking about? Robbery, burglary, murder, assault with a deadly weapon, assault on a police officer? What category? I know you don't go to, again, I want to emphasize, you don't go to state prison for misdemeanors. You go for felonies. In my experience, it's not just one. You've got to do more than one in order to get to state prison. So what type of categories are we talking about? Felonies. What's the category that if we wanted to break those down? Are murders being released, or assault with a deadly weapon, assault on a police officer, rape? I mean, what categories are coming
Well,
out?
those individuals fall under 667.5 or 1192.7. They have been convicted to state prison on violent or serious offenses, so they wouldn't meet the NRP criteria to begin with.
Okay.
So,
But they're saying that domestic violence is qualified for NRP.
domestic violence meets it because in addition to the commitment offense of 273.5, there's a statutory requirement attached to it as a condition of parole to complete 52 weeks batters program. Your example, robbery, which again is 667.5, if you have a weapon attached to it, we don't have to go through the penal code, doesn't have a statutory requirement to meet any mandate while they're on parole. Now, if there was a trailer piece of legislation that said a robber now has to, get a AA degree or a vocational training degree, then that would be a different story. Domestic violence happens to have that statutory requirement. That's why they will be monitored opposed to the others.
Okay, so what about a robber?
A robbery just would not be eligible for non-revocable parole.
Okay, burglar?
Burglar, depending on a burglary first, burglary second. You get into very specifics into committing. We'd have to look at what the sentencing documents are. But burglars, if it's first, they're not eligible for revocable parole.
Grand theft auto?
Grand theft auto is.
They're eligible for release.
Yes, they are.
Okay. So we can anticipate.
Drugs.
Drugs? What about the drug charges?
Drugs are non-revocable parole.
So where are we going to find all these people, 40,000? So there's 40,000 folks in prison. If you look at the main category, number one category, would it be that are going to be released? Domestic violence? If you were
And I don't
categorizing.
have the stats in front of me, but I would venture to say narcotics is primarily the bulk of your population. Now, with that, we have locally Prop 36. You have drug diversion before they even go to state prison. Those programs are still in place. But the bulk of the commitments for NRP are narcotic offenses.
Okay. But just to get a category.
Including sales?
Including small sales.
Small.
Not large scale.
Okay.
And we know the recidivism rate is not very positive. The other issue with the mentally ill and the sex offenders, there will be a category of mentally ill and sex offenders that are going to be released under this program?
If they were committed to state prison on a nonviolent or non-serious offense, they meet the criteria. Their mental illness does not exclude them from NRP.
So if we were to be honest, we would say this does not enhance public safety. This particular program does not enhance public safety for John Q. Citizen, a taxpayer. What this does is help the overcrowded prison system, may bring light to people who are now incarcerated, but the jeopardy to the general public is really what I consider of major consequences. And what the police department's going to do is what they can do with their resources, what the anti-gang programs are going to do. But if you have a gang member who's in prison and he comes out and he goes back to the gang and he's welcomed as a hero and there's no opportunities for anything else, I can imagine that he will end up in prison once again. So the habitual revolving door continues. I just think that the failure rests on the governor and the state of California, not the probation, not parole, not law enforcement, but those are the folks who need to be criticized for letting this disaster, and I think this is an imminent disaster that's going to be happening to the innocent taxpayers of the city and the state of California. And I will end my soapbox with that. And thank you for coming down. I do appreciate it.
Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Franco, I represent the neighborhoods right outside Skid Row. And when you speak of the 800 in Skid Row, and then you have surrounding communities that are saturated with gangs, and what you're saying is that of the 21,000, a percentage of them will be going into LA County, but we don't know exactly where in LA County will end up because of the address they leave us when they exit the facility. Would that be accurate?
That's correct.
So at this stage, when I go to my Chambers of Commerce meeting, when I go to the neighborhood council meetings, and the headlines are going to read, they're going to read that 21,000 prisoners will be let out into the streets. How do I characterize in the way in which, can I say this, are they going to be let into the areas that are the most dense, heavily populated with gangs? Is that being factored in at all, or is it more just the profile of the individual and how they fit the criteria that's been set by the courts?
Well, there's no way of telling exactly how it's going to pan out. We can only look at past practice, if you will, and parolees or inmates, when they're released, they release and they go back to the communities they came from.
Okay.
That's just...
But I understand, but in that analysis, will there be a process by which we say in Northeast Los Angeles or East Los Angeles or South Los Angeles, the bulk of the folks who are being let out are going to be sent there? Or are we going to disperse them throughout California where it's not as dense? Are we going to compound a problem that's already intensified because of the sheer numbers of people that live there?
I will only respond by saying is Northeast will not get a disproportionate amount of parolees than anyone else in the city, county, or state than they already have.
So it's going to be a reflection of what's already there.
That is correct.
So
In all likelihood.
So if it's crowded as it is, and we have a lot of gangs as it is, they're going to come back because that's the way it is.
Well, and it's important to recognize, because you're talking about gang members. Your concern is predominantly, I'm assuming, the gang members in that Northeast area.
Well, only because I had a committee meeting this past week,
Okay.
and I had it on Temple Beaudry, Echo Park, as you know, Heights. What I got from the senior lead officers and from the captain, those who work in gang intervention, is that because people were asking, we have such a high spike in graffiti. The graffiti has gone up through the roof. And the response was, well, we have these individuals coming out of prison who are now being viewed upon as a hero, and they're trying to make their mark or make their presence known, and the first thing they do, they start tagging all the walls and they go after whoever they think they need to go after. And they're actually blaming this outflow of prisoners that has been that we've been reading about. Now, how true that is and how coincidental that is, I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows. But that's why I'm asking, because these would be very real, live questions for people who are enduring that type of criminality in our neighborhoods that we've taken so long to clean up.
Prior to today's date, no one has been released, or no one will be released early from state prison. So if there's been a spike in your graffiti, it is not directly related to NRP. The law went into effect today.
Okay.
So to use your words, that might be a little more coincidental than an effect of NRP.
Okay.
So,
And that's good to know, because now we know what to expect in terms of what we need to get ready for, since today is a court decision. You're saying today is the date that was
that is
demarcated?
Today is the effective date. Now, in response to your city council meeting, the Department of Corrections has a public information officer. We are available. I have contact information that I will leave here. A lot of the information we know that goes out to our communities is not accurate. And it's very important for us to educate those folks, not that they're going to be concerned any less, not that we can do anything about this piece of legislation. However, it's extremely helpful so that the community can equip themselves in the way that they see is fit for their individual community. Neighborhood watches, et cetera, et cetera. Those are very, very effective. So the department is available to come out to your community council meetings, to your public meetings, city council meetings, whatever it is that you need for us to continue to communicate, to continue to collaborate, because frankly, we are stuck with this piece of legislation. So we can't go backwards. What we can do is do a better job of working collectively on additional strategies to manage this, not only for the city, the county, but the state as a whole.
And I think what helps in terms of this notion of a proactive management process, if we start looking at, okay, well, how do we lessen that blow? I think eliminating the exaggerations is going to be key. For example, we know if we go to a website, we know where the child molesters are placed. You can literally see them in dots on a map in the neighborhoods. Now, when we have the ability to access information like that, when we see a neighborhood that can be designated with some kind of an icon or symbol that says these other folks have been let out in this program and they're here now, so we can see just how intense their presence will be in our neighborhoods, will that be conceivable?
Absolutely. That's public information. In fact, the sex offender issue is near and dear to my heart. I had to testify a few years ago from the legislature regarding this issue. The Department of Corrections has every sex offender on parole on GPS. It's incredible technology. So virtually real time, we know exactly where our sex offenders are residing. We come out and do presentations. We have our parole agents come out, demonstrate the type of technology we have, using sample cases, doing exactly what you pointed out, is identifying in your community exactly where these offenders reside. We have those individuals are supervised at 20 to 1, between 20 and 30 to 1. We have our active sex offenders and passive sex offenders. We are committed to ensuring that we work collectively with LAPD here in this city and monitor enhanced supervision for those individuals.
But to be very clear, are we equipped to raise our level of awareness using everything you just described for the sex offender, for the populations being let out, so that we know where they're going and where they're staying, so we can be ready for it? Because right now it sounds like we're going to have waves of criminals coming out, taking siege of our neighborhoods. I mean, that's how it's been characterized. But we need some reality checks. Do we have that capacity in the LAPD working with the chief and her department to identify where they're going to go? Do we have that capability today?
Internally we do. The chief mentioned that they were going to look at plotting the NRP parolees on their database that you can access through the Megan's Law on sex offender parolees. That would be useful and interesting. But internally, what we are going to be able to do is go into the Pulley lead system and identify. That's a database that we're using internally to see where these people are going and where we can expect them.
What can we do? I mean, I would very much appreciate if we made this information public. where it can be accessed by all the different agencies and programs and departments. I think it'll intensify our current gang-related programs, our interventionists, our gang interventionists, our gang prevention programs. If we all looked at the same screen and said, well, in the Pico Union area, we have 50 more of these individuals released, and they're going to go in this area, so the senior lead officer can work with the local volunteers, the chamber, the business investment district, and say, we need to really be alert because we're going to have this kind of activity given what's happening in that particular block. Can we get to that point?
That's what we're going to do internally. I mean, that's clear.
No, I'm asking externally. Can a public access to that location of these folks?
Councilmember, I think that would be a useful thing, and I'll have to talk offline with the chief regarding the plans of CDCR to put that on their database, which is already available to the public.
Mr. Chair, just a minute. Mr. Chair, can we get a report back to see how we can get to that?
What we're going to do is, because this is an informational item only, Mr. Zine put a motion on Friday. We will marry the two up next week when the motion comes officially to the council, and then we'll ask for that report back.
I have a point of clarification on this. These NRP folks, the NRP folks, they're being released. They don't have to provide, other than for a year, some type of information, residents, et cetera. After that year, they're free to do as they wish and move where they wish. Am I correct?
It's even less. They only have to provide that upon release where they live, and it cannot be verified.
So say they move a week after they're released, they don't have to provide their current location.
Correct.
That is correct.
So
No, but I'm talking about volume, Councilmember.
Pardon me?
I'm talking about volume. I understand what you're saying in terms of one or two individuals, but in my district, there's going to be a high number, for the sheer fact I have a high number of gangs. And so the folks who get incarcerated at a very high volume, it's only logical they're going to come back.
Right. And then when they release from prison, they'll give the location they're going to. But a day later, they could move to another location, you won't have any idea. That's my concern. As child molesters, you'll know where they are. I'm supposed to be keeping track of them.
Right.
And Mr. Reyes has a point about tracking individuals, but once they're out, they can go from one area to the other without requiring any type of reporting.
That is correct. They'll be subject to search and seizure if they're stopped, and if you can utilize your FY process that LAPD uses.
Yeah, but
And if you have an internal mechanism, that's fine. Now, in terms of releasing and a list that we will provide, we will work collectively here in this city, and you will know, internally, you will know who is being released and how you disseminate that information and what database the city has available to share with their partners. I'm not familiar with.
But that data is good for one day only. is the
Okay,
problem.
but let me just emphasize this point, and I just want us to try to grasp what I'm trying to say here is that when I have 70,000 people per square mile, and even though they might give us a different address, wherever they go first, it's going to have a profound impact in my district because of that sheer number of people living in one place. So if I have 5 or 10 coming in, they're going to come in within a 2-3 block radius. That's what's going to be felt by the people there. Even though they might move or go somewhere else, that initial splash is going to have a major ripple effect, and that's what I'm trying to get at.
I was trying to do some follow-up after that point so you could track that. One more question I have. If a person's in prison for 5 years versus the person in prison for 25 years, is there any criteria they're going to use on the release, the person who's got 5 years and got 2 years left, or the person who's got 25 years and he's got 20 years left? Are they going to use any of that criteria on the release, or is that not part of the equation?
That's not part of the equation.
Okay, just basically the crime and the seriousness.
Eligibility based on 1192.7 or 6 and 7.5.
So you could have been sentenced for 25 years in prison for whatever you did, whatever this with a gun, and you've been in prison a year, and you could be getting out under this program.
No. If you've been convicted with a gun and you're in prison for 25 years, you're not going to be eligible for non-revocable.
Say 5 years. 5 years.
Well, depending on what that commitment offense, usually, 5 years, unless it's a high term, there's no telling what you'd have to give me specifics on what commitment offense, because 5 years seems like quite a long time for a nonviolent offender to be in prison.
But they're gonna go individually on each individual.
We're going through every individual file, 21,000 files in this county, one by one, to review to see if there's anything that either DOJ, a rap sheet, sentencing documents did not capture that are inclusive of our exclusionary criteria. Rules violations, for anyone who knows who's been a career criminal and worked with CDCR of the prison, lepers don't change their spots. If they've been disruptive and they've been disrupted out in your community and they go into the prison, they don't stop being disruptive. So if they're gang members that meet NRP, but they go in, they don't cease being gang members. They go into the prisons and they continue to engage in gang activity. If they are caught, which is a large population, I worked as a correctional officer in a prison in 1986, quite a long time ago. Their behavior does not cease. They get a rules violation for gang activity, that excludes them from NRP.
Okay. And these are every prison that the state operates?
That is correct.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Come before council then on the motion?
Let me have Phyllis Doherty come and speak, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do with this.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Franco, really, thank you very much. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes, but thank you for all the information. And Captain, thank you. Don't leave yet.
Thank you.
Good morning, Phyllis Doherty. I'm concerned as an apartment owner and for AGLA and the various groups might need to be notified on this. So I would like us to keep very, very close contact with them because this is going to impact property owners who won't know who's coming into their property, and they have to accept almost anyone. I have a degree in social and criminal justice, so I'm very, very familiar with what happens. So I'm wondering if there's some way that we can help coordinate something such as Mr. Reyes said, if that does occur, to make sure that the apartment associations know. I'd be glad to work with you on that.
Yeah, they are required to check with their databases, and those names will be shown as parolees in that database.
Right, the parolees, but they're going to be the apartment owners are not going to know that they can check that. So if there's anything that we can do to make sure that they have some kind of information on this.
Okay.
Thank you.
With that, because it's informational only, we can't take an action on it, but we do have a Mr. Zines motion, so we will marry that up next week or so. Say in 2 weeks, Captain, could you report back to us in 2 weeks with the information that Mr. Reyes has requested? And how we can track it, also anything you can do to notify the Apartment Owner Association of those people as well, because they have requirements on them for checking parolees before they let them in certain apartments. All right, thank you very much. So we'll hear back in 2 weeks once we get Mr. Zines' motion in officially. Thank you. That concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much.